3 weeks after bringing my daughter Emma into the world, life was finally beginning to find its rhythm. The exhaustion of sleepless nights hadn't disappeared, but every tiny smile and soft yawn made every moment feel worthwhile. My husband Ryan had flown out for a 2-week work assignment abroad, so it was just the two of us at home, Emma and me. That particular morning felt like any other. I buckled her into her car seat and drove across town for her pediatric checkup. The doctor confirmed she was thriving and developing exactly as she should. I remember the smile that stayed on my face the entire drive back. Then everything shattered in an instant. A truck blew through a red light at a busy intersection. I had almost no time to respond. The collision sent my car spinning across the road. Metal-folded glass exploded, my head snapped hard against the seat, and the world dissolved into a fog of noise and disorientation. When my eyes finally opened, I was lying in an ambulance. My very first thought wasn't about my own body. It was Emma. I kept asking over and over whether she was all right. A paramedic eventually leaned close and told me she was safe, that she had come away with only minor bruising. The relief that flooded through me was so overwhelming I couldn't hold back the tears. At the hospital, the medical team walked me through my injuries, explaining that I would need to stay for several days while they monitored my condition. Caring for a newborn alone was completely out of the question, but I wasn't frightened by that. My parents lived just 20 minutes away. They were retired. They talked constantly about the importance of family, and I was completely certain they would step up without a second thought. I reached for my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Just hearing her voice brought me a wave of relief. "Mom," I managed, fighting through tears, "I've been in an accident. I'm at the hospital." A brief silence followed. "An accident?" she repeated. I walked her through what had happened, making sure she understood that Emma was physically okay. Then I told her the doctors needed to keep me admitted for a few days and that I needed help. "Can you and Dad take care of Emma until Ryan gets back?" I asked quietly. Another silence stretched out. Then she sighed. "Oh, honey, I'm not sure about that." I thought she must have misunderstood the situation. "Mom, this is an emergency. It's only for a few days." But rather than softening, her voice grew more resolute. "We already raised our children. We're at a point in our lives where we can't be taking on a newborn." My stomach lurched. I asked to speak with my father, telling myself his response would be different. It wasn't. He sided with her without hesitation. "Maybe one of your friends could step in," he offered. "We're just not able to do this right now." I sat there holding the phone, barely able to process what I was hearing. This was their granddaughter. I had spent years showing up for them whenever they needed anything, never keeping score. And now, in the moment when I needed them most, they were stepping back. The call ended shortly after. I stared at the blank screen and felt, for the first time since the crash, truly and completely alone. The room felt colder after that call. A nurse came by to check my readings, but I barely registered her presence. My mind kept circling back to the conversation, replaying it in fragments. And as it did, older memories began quietly surfacing alongside it. Growing up, my younger brother Tyler had always occupied a different position in the family. When he forgot an assignment, my parents laughed it off. When I brought home strong grades, it was treated as baseline expectation. When he needed financial help, a solution always materialized. When I needed support, there was invariably a reason it wasn't possible. For years, I had rationalized it, convinced myself that imperfection was universal in families and that reading too much into it wasn't fair. But lying there injured in that hospital bed with a newborn I couldn't reach and a husband thousands of miles away, the pattern was impossible to explain away anymore. Hours crawled by. I kept checking my phone, quietly hoping they might call back with a change of heart. They didn't. My anxiety built steadily as the afternoon wore on. Ryan was unreachable across time zones. My parents had said no, and I still had no concrete answer for who would look after Emma while I recovered. Every possible worst-case scenario seemed to cycle through my head without stopping. By late afternoon, a numb kind of exhaustion had begun settling over the panic. Maybe this was simply the truth of things. Maybe I had placed too much expectation in the wrong people. Then came a knock at the door. A nurse stepped in, wearing a small, warm smile. "You have a visitor," she said. I looked up, genuinely puzzled. I hadn't told anyone else I was here. The door opened a little wider, and my grandfather walked in. I simply stared at him for a moment. He was 81 years old, but he moved with a quiet steadiness that had never left him. He was wearing his familiar brown jacket and carrying a small paper bag. The instant his eyes landed on my face, his expression shifted. "What happened?" he asked softly. Those two words were enough to undo me completely. Everything I had been holding together all day came apart at once. He pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat with me while I told him everything. The crash, my injuries, Ryan being away, and then the phone call with my parents. His jaw tightened noticeably as I described their response. "They said no?" he asked. I nodded. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he leaned forward and looked at me directly. "Don't worry about Emma. We'll sort this out." The conviction in his voice did something that nothing else had managed to do all day. It steadied me. He was on the phone within minutes. He called relatives, longtime family friends, and people from his church community. Within the hour, he had mapped out a full care schedule, a rotating group of trusted people prepared to cover Emma's care until I was back on my feet. I couldn't believe it. A problem that had felt completely unresolvable just hours before had been handled by an 81-year-old man with a phone and an unwillingness to accept that family couldn't figure something out. Before he left, he held my hand for a moment. "Your daughter is family," he said simply. "Family shows up." I was still crying, but they were different tears now. What I didn't know yet was that Grandpa wasn't done. The following morning, he drove directly to my parents' house. I pieced together what happened later through relatives who had heard about it. He walked into their living room and asked them one question. "Why did you refuse to help your own granddaughter?" My parents began explaining themselves immediately. They brought up their routines, their personal plans, the difficulty of caring for a newborn at their age. Grandpa listened, and then he made clear that none of it was an adequate answer. He wasn't asking them to take a vacation. Their daughter had been in a serious accident. Their granddaughter needed temporary care. This was precisely the kind of moment that defined what family actually meant, and they had declined to show up for it. The more they tried to justify themselves, the less defensible it sounded. For the first time, they were hearing their own decision reflected back through someone else's eyes. They didn't like what they heard. Over the following days, word had traveled quietly through the wider family. Relatives reached out to check on me. Several had already heard what happened. The reaction was largely one of disbelief. The same two people who had spoken about family loyalty, their entire lives had turned away their own daughter when she called from a hospital bed. That contradiction was hard for anyone who knew them to sit comfortably with. By the end of that week, something had clearly shifted in them. According to Grandpa, they went very quiet at some point and then made a decision. They were coming to the hospital to see me. I was discharged a few days later and finally had Emma back in my arms. Holding her again felt like being handed something I hadn't realized I could lose. My parents did come. They apologized and told me outright that they had handled things badly. Their words landed and they mattered. But the hurt didn't simply evaporate because an apology had been offered. What stayed with me most wasn't anything they said. It was the image of my grandfather walking through that hospital door in his brown jacket, holding a paper bag, asking what happened, and then quietly getting to work. When everyone else led with reasons why they couldn't help, He led with the question of how to fix it. That distinction changed how I understood people. That week reshaped something in me permanently. I came to understand that love isn't really demonstrated through words spoken during easy moments. It reveals itself in who actually appears when things fall apart. Years have passed since that difficult week. I think about it often, not because of the people who looked away, but because of the one who walked through a door and reminded me what showing up for someone truly looks like.